It's an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome, on behalf of the NALS board, Helen Douglas as keynote speaker for our 2021 conference. Originally from Canada, Helen lives and practices in Cape Town, South Africa. Her bachelor's degree is from Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, and her MA in philosophy is from the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. Helen is a philosophical counselor. Philosophical counseling, she says, is, quote, a close and careful conversation to find one's own way in a troubled world, a meaningful and emancipating alternative to psychotherapy. It puts human suffering in a relational rather than a medical framework. There's no doctor, no patient, no diagnosis, no treatment, and only engaged conversation about this particular life, what is happening, what is to be done, what it all means. Philosophical counseling is at once a therapeutic, ethical, educational, and political practice, end quote. Helen's incredible book, it is Love in Arms, Violence and Justification After Levinas, was published in 2011. I believe I got my copy, Helen, you're gonna have to remind me, I believe I got my copy at the NALS Toulouse conference in 2010. It's actually an uncorrected proof of her book. And that was the panel. It was at a panel at which I first heard Helen speak and was captivated by her work. Alfonso Lingus described Helen's book as, quote, one of the most refined, searching, and penetrating analyses of the core of Emmanuel Levinas's work. It places her among his most significant commentators, he said. This is a work of a real philosopher, a real thinker, he said. Helen's publications include, in addition to her book, articles in South African Journal of Philosophy, Archives of the Non-Racial, The Salon, Philosophical Practice, Journal of American Philosophical Practitioners Association, Radical Psychology, Janus Head, European Journal of Psychotherapy, Counseling and Health, Perspectives on Evil and Human Wickedness, a book collection from women in philosophical counseling, etc. She has book reviews of Jill Stauffer's book, Anthony Steinbach's, and forthcoming, Agatha Bialik-Robson's book, Another Finitude, Messianic Vitalism in Philosophy. She's also published poetry and prose, including a piece that we will hear today. She served as deputy editor of New Agenda, South African Journal of Social and Economic Policy. I had the great fortune to reconnect with Helen in 2017, and then to hear her speak about her experience when she graciously met with a group of students I had brought to South Africa in 2019. We studied The Housekeeper's Tale. We were all blown away by her presentation and so grateful to talk with her and learn from her. So Helen, thank you so much for your generosity and this gift of insight and sharing you're giving all of us today. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Helen to our Zoom stage.
Thank you, Katie, and the organizing committee and the board, who clearly cannot be thanked enough this week. This conference has just been fabulous. Since my first NALS conference in 2007, this community has been a steady source of inspiration and support in the relative isolation in which I work. I'm especially grateful for this opportunity to think together about political solidarity and how its significance may be clarified through the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. And I've added a little epigraph. This quote kept coming up to me during some of the discussions this week, and I think it needs to be on record here from The I and the Totality in Entre Nous, page 36. Levinas writes, to be disengaged from the totality, while at the same time accomplishing a work in it, is not to stand against the totality, but for it, that is, in its service. To serve the totality is to fight for justice. The totality is constituted by violence and corruption. The work consists in introducing equality into a world turned over to the interplay and the mortal strife of freedoms. In 1987, my husband Rob and I, he's here by the way, were recruited in Canada to move to Johannesburg to run an underground safe house for the anti-apartheid liberation struggle. We were there until July 1990. Those years raised deep questions for me. I only found a way to properly frame and understand my experience of violence and resistance, of one's responsibility for the suffering of others, of solidarity and the wisdom of love when I discovered Levinas. This in turn led me to develop a therapeutic counseling practice based on his phenomenology of subjectivity. I wrote The Housekeeper's Tale for a 2016 conference on the politics of armed struggle in Southern Africa. It sets out several questions from the School of Underground. What does it mean to go to war? What does it mean to love your enemy? What is the difference between good guys and bad guys? What is signified in violence? Before we meet the housekeeper, here's her backstory with some Levinasian commentary. Apartheid was an institutionalized, how nice to say was, an institutionalized system of racial segregation in South Africa between 1948 and the early 1990s, designed to promote the interests of the minority white population and its economy and exclude the majority Black population, except for its labor. Its authoritarian political culture dominated every sphere and every moment of life. The 1980s saw the formation of a powerful mass democratic movement, largely allied to the banned African National Congress, the ANC, and its imprisoned leaders, including Nelson Mandela. The state struck back with a policy called total onslaught, a state of emergency that included media restrictions, the banning of organizations and persons, mass detentions, including thousands of children, detainees held without trial in undisclosed locations and in solitary, and extensive state use of torture and assassination, which in turn was met with escalating popular unrest, international pressure, and armed resistance. We were following this from Canada. Rob had been involved in anti-apartheid solidarity work for a decade. He was 31, I was 29. We had wanted a change of scenery, a bit of adventure. We knew the ANC had a school for exiles in Tanzania, and since Rob is a teacher, we thought we might volunteer there for a year. He approached the ANC rep in Toronto. A couple of months later, we got a reply. If we were willing to risk going to Tanzania, there was something else we could consider. It would be more dangerous, but much more useful to the movement. The Black urban townships in South Africa were under military lockdown. Activists were rounded up and detained or disappeared. They needed safe places to stay, which meant in the peaceful white suburbs. Because any white South African activists who were trustworthy enough would already be known to the security police, they needed white internationals who could come in, set up a surface life, and rent premises for a safe house. Would we go to Johannesburg and do this? We knew what was being asked. In the 80s, Vancouver was a center of third world solidarity. We attended events and rallies, read everything, met freedom fighters from Chile, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Greece, and Southern Africa. I was also active in the peace movement and knew Canadian veterans of the international brigades who had fought fascism in Spain in the 1930s. I was impressed and inspired by their courage and commitment, but even more by their character. You could read it in the way they carried themselves, so lightly, but also with a gravitas that seemed hard-won and trustworthy. They were the ones who interested me, real comrades, the ones I always wanted to be, but knew I was not. Rob's response was immediate. Yes, send me. I wanted to want to go, but I didn't. I couldn't. It was too much. I tried to find a way out. Then, brushing my teeth a few nights later, I saw my face in the mirror and was stopped short by one question. In 30 years, do you want to be the person who said no to this? My response was immediate. No, I did not. I could not. There was no real choice. I was chosen. Rob said it would only be for 1 year, maybe 2. So what's going on there? It's obvious that oppressed people will rise in self-defense, but not everyone does, and some will go further than others. And some will rise against the oppression of others, while others won't, and some will go further. What makes the difference? What manner of motivation? The night that I knew I was going, I also remembered a scene from a news documentary from South Africa. People getting on a bus in a township north of Pretoria, in the dark, well before dawn, in bitter cold. The picture was murky and grainy, filmed illegally using available light. Men and women wrapped in blankets, moving so quietly as like ghosts, as if trying not to wake up too much. Ahead of them, a 2-hour trip to their work in Johannesburg, a long, hard day, and then another bus home in the dark. It hit me differently than the scenes of people marching in the street or the police violence of shambox and dogs and bullets. This was simply heartbreaking. People should not have to live like that. I found I could not leave those Soshanguve commuters alone to their suffering. This didn't make any sense to me until I read Levinas a decade later, and then it did. This is the anarchic origin of solidarity, the traumatism of the revelation of the face of the other, of finding oneself inexorably held hostage. In Blanchot's phrase, born unto the grief of the other, which is the grief of all. Rob and I arrived in South Africa just after a bomb attack at the Johannesburg Magistrates Court, where 3 police were killed. Suddenly, we were no longer supporting an armed struggle from the other side of the world. We were part of it, responsible. We had enemies. We were enemies. This was very hard on our Canadian heads. At the same time, we were not directly involved with military assignments. Our job was to provide cover. The comrades who used the safe house would come and go, but we were camouflage, part of the house itself, holding the line between above and below, which meant being completely apolitical tourists. No going to meetings or marches, no reacting or arguing or opinionating with white South Africans. We had to meet them as we found them. Many were afraid and angry. After all, they were so few and the Blacks were so many. Would Rob and I be any different if we had their indoctrination? Hard to say. Were they the enemy? Yes. I was really lucky to get work in a bookshop where I found bright, funny, passionate colleagues who despised the regime and helped to keep me sane. We became a great circle of friends, and I was always lying to them. It also turned out that our safe house was not just a way station, as we had believed. It was part of a top secret plan called Operation Vula, short for Vulindlela, which means open the way. It was designed to infiltrate senior leaders in exile back into the country, to align the structures in the mass movement, the trade unions, and the armed wing, and to strengthen the lines of communication between them and the leadership in exile, O.R. Tambo, Joe Slovo, Chris Hani, and in prison, Mandela and others. Our house was the Johannesburg base of the overall commander of Vula, Mac Maharaj. He was in his 50s then, had been in the struggle all his life, including 12 years in Robben Island prison with Mandela and the other leaders from the 1964 Rivonia trial. He always treated us with consideration, made a point of keeping us informed, always teaching, swapping stories, and lots of laughter, and the humor was pretty dark sometimes. He is a true comrade, like the people I admired in Vancouver, which is to say he kept his humanity and his politics in the proper order. This proper order is another Levinasian piece, ethics before politics and politics because ethics. Clearly, well-executed strategies and tactics are crucial and essential to get right, but politics isn't the horse, it's the cart. It isn't the dog, it's the tail. A liberation struggle has to be guided by ethics, infinite responsibility, even love. Getting it right means fighting effectively for justice and for peace. Without this, the cause may already be lost. Ideals can harden into dogma and stupidity. Freedom fighters can get drunk on the power and joy of resistance, appropriating its righteousness for themselves, forsaking all others. This speaks precisely to Levinas's constant concern with the saying and the said, with the need for consciousness in institutions that are nevertheless never as good as the good that inspires them, and need always to be interruptible when put in question by that good and the desolate, commanding face of the other. This is why, when we get it wrong, it's called corruption. At root, the word means to destroy, spoil, to utterly break. The comrades I loved and admired knew this well. You could read it in the way they carried themselves. No doubt they learned it from comrades they loved and admired. The practical wisdom of ethics and politics means responding correctly to the situation in motion, not following a preset playbook or simply wreaking havoc. Like martial arts, you only learn it in practice with others in the world, not from theory or the instruction of teachers, but in apprenticeship with masters. I also battled with the moral paradox of armed struggle, this business of fighting for peace. Levinas puts it perfectly in Otherwise Than Being. He writes, the true problem for us Westerners is not so much to refuse violence as to question ourselves about a struggle against violence, which, without blanching in non-resistance to evil, could avoid the institution of violence out of this very struggle. I believed the armed struggle was necessary and just. I knew that my counterpart in the South African Defence Force could equally believe that their violence was necessary and just. I knew I was right and he was wrong, but I didn't know how to tell that story all the way down. My counterpart's justification, and we must also recognize his courage, the possibility of his ignorant sincerity, and also that he was likely conscripted. His justification was patently built on lies and violence and war. Apartheid is a crime against humanity. To stand against it is an affirmation of that humanity. Just as clearly, the Congress movement's vision was a unified, non-racial, and non-sexist democratic South Africa. Its 1955 Freedom Charter declared, quote, for all our country and the world to know that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, Black and white, and that no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people. We did not refuse violence. We did not blanch in non-resistance to evil. But what peace would come? I needed to understand the difference between getting it right and getting it wrong. When we think about a just cause for going to war, the selfless defense of humanity is perhaps the highest, precisely because disinterested. It's easy to claim, harder to live up to. The participation of white internationals in the South African struggle perhaps exemplifies this. We could reasonably say it was none of our business and walk away. I tried to, but not without fault. What we bore witness to, the fact of the matter, is that humanity, freedom, and equality are indeed and indisputably indivisible. To quote John Donne, any man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. To quote Eugene V. Debs, while there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. Stirring words, simple truth. but it's tricky. Were we so selfless? How could we be? What was asked of us, what we asked of ourselves and each other is what one would ask of a saint, to quote Levinas. We also had our personal agendas, narratives, and egos. And then again, internationalist solidarity also entailed a personal betrayal of other orders of allegiance and identity, which comes as another violence, as is necessary self-inflicted wound or willing sacrifice. These two factors are rarely, if ever, acknowledged or discussed, except probably Jan Patočka on the sacrifice of identity and the solidarity of the shaken. And I wish we were talking more about that here, but the other cause for justified violence is self-defense, rising against an aggressor or tyrant in solidarity with one's own. A people united will never be defeated, as the Chileans chanted. Un pueblo unido jamás será vencido. What is asked of freedom fighters is what one would ask of a hero. That's a lot, also hard to live up to. But this position is ethically tricky precisely because it is self-interested. On the one hand, it risks the institution of retaliatory cycles of violence. On the other, the temptations of blood and roots nationalism, or of emulating the ruthless self-advancement of the tyrant. Nevertheless, a fine risk to be run. Justice demands redress and the restoration of humiliated identities, lives, and ways of life. In the presence of these and other hazards, the fight for liberation remains necessary, but if it will be good enough, it must also be tempered by love and the desire for peace, peace upon peace to them that are far off and to them that are nigh, even perhaps with the tyrant. This also needs to be worked out each time in the event. 1 year, maybe 2, turned into 2.5, and then 3. I was taking serious strain. I worried a lot, clearly, still unsure that I was up for the job, afraid for the safety of our people, afraid for everything. I started to take to my bed to shake. There was also Rob's presence, the shared adventure, laughter, warmth, closeness, conviviality with friends. We partied a lot. Also, of course, the enlivening excitement of a fascist state in crisis. It is something in such conditions to have put your life in the hands of others and have them entrust theirs to you. Things changed in February 1990 when F.W. de Klerk became state president and suddenly unbanned the ANC, the Communist Party, and other groups, and the bumpy process of negotiations began. The armed struggle was suspended, but structures stayed in place, waiting to see what the government was up to. It did feel like the end was near. Then some comrades in Durban fell into the hands of the security police, along with some documents related to Operation Bula. Mac arrived very late on a Friday night to warn us that we were compromised and the police might be coming. We rehearsed our legend, the detailed cover story that would account for our relationship with him. He was the tenant in our garden flat, a quiet Indian businessman, but we didn't have much to do with each other. On Monday, the police and soldiers arrived en masse at our house, heavily armed, as if expecting to capture the high command of MK. But it was just Rob. I was at work and the comrades were long gone. They interrogated Rob for 2 hours and he kept to his story. They searched the house and left, promising to return. We flew out of the country on the Thursday morning. We were in London being debriefed when we heard that Mac and others had been arrested. And then we went home. Which brings us to the housekeeper's tale, which begins with a quote from South African poet Keropetse Kgossitsile. Need I remind anyone again that armed struggle is an act of love? Underground. Nobody writes about the underground. There are tales of adventure, but the underground itself will not be betrayed, will not be brought to light. Underground refracts. Non-place of slippage and ambiguity, it is the stuff of legends, of crooked roots and shy, sly creatures. It has a precise clarity, another kind of glory, another form of life, of passage, of resistance, of devotion. The underground is not a location. It is a relationship with knowing, with trust and identity. The housekeeper is the door, but not the key, is the lock that allows the key to work. For the others, safe house means refuge, a cave to hole up in, a workplace for plans and preparations, a base to set out from and hope to return to. But the one who keeps the safe house decomposes over time like a scarecrow in a forest into the underground she serves. Passive among the activists, her task is merely to take place. Both gatekeeper and gate, she is the X that marks the hidden treasure, the mantle upon which the purloined letter safely rests. Those who know pass through, and she closes behind them. Those who do not pass her by, oblivious. They know the underground is somewhere out there, but it's not here. Not here. In the light of day, the housekeeper is incapable of telling the truth. It's like a curse, this situation of telling, the impossibility of confession without betrayal. In the dark and of the dark, however, she speaks with perfect authority. It's as if the walls begin to speak. 3 questions from the School of Underground. The first question, what does it mean to go to war? To be summoned and to answer the call, to be prepared to die if needs be, to surrender yourself into the hands of others, to offer up the only life you've ever known the very moment you say, yes, I will go. To be prepared to die is not to die, not yet, but to unseat the power of the fear of death. At that moment, to the self you were, you become unknown, unfamiliar, unrecognizable, unmoored, and yet true. To join the liberation struggle is already an act of liberation, and insofar as your participation is neither coerced nor mistaken, and you love the life you give, insofar as the struggle is just and its goal is peace, insofar as there is no guarantee of return, no guarantee at all, it may also be emancipatory. Nations and peoples are liberated as from a foreign power. Emancipation is a personal event, very small, very expansive, as the birth of a universe. The second question. Jesus says, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Nietzsche replies, those who fight monsters must be careful not to become monsters thereby. What does it mean to love your enemy? Above all, to know their humanness, even as you know their monstrousness, even as this puts your own in question, even as blood cries out from the ground, from the streets, from the heart, even as you are willing to kill, if needs be, to end this violence, to know the monstrous enemy as human, as a monster because human, to refuse to deny the humanity of those who are hateful precisely because they deny their own, to take pity. Nietzsche continues, and if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. For the harm we did to the enemy, to each other, to ourselves, for all the violence committed in the name of justice and freedom, even now we hang over the abyss, still stretching towards peace. The sage Mengzi reminds us again, The ways are but two, love and want of love. That's all. The third question, what does it mean, violence? Genesis, in the beginning, a scene of two. One rises up and strikes the other down. The one struck down cries out, how can you do this to me? Cries out again, what am I that this could be done? The murderer is silent. Only when challenged says, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? Says, I am not glad and I am not sorry. It leaves me cold. What does it mean to keep a brother? What does it mean to be left cold? But wait, only when challenged. Who challenges the executioner? Who has arrived so late on the scene? It might have been me or you, a third party, neither one nor the other, brought to bear precisely in response to the call of the fallen one, as if we had been cast or conjured up to play the witness, the accuser, the judge, called to take account and to make amends. Suddenly, it's a scene of justice. And so we find ourselves at the beginning, at the scene of a crime, rising up, turning towards or against each other, using and theming, taking a stand or stumbling, striking out and being struck down, turning away, leaving cold. We are challenged in turn to confess or deny, to explain and justify. We bear witness. We frame our testimony as history, politics, destiny, human nature. We see how fear and desire beget violence, how difference begets violence, how violence begets violence. And so, in the name of justice and peace, we strive to contain and control our violence. We create institutions, ideologies, and technologies, all promising a better world to come. Promise the world, but not yet. We hate war, we do. But it seems as though it is violence all the way down with us, as far as we know, as far as we can tell. But perhaps another story lies hidden within or beneath that primal scene of fratricide. If we are truly born to sin, violent by nature and all the way down, then why that cry, that astonishment, that devastation? How can you do this? What am I that this can be done? Even as in this very moment, you and I can find ourselves cast up and implicated, already answering for justice. We who are not one or the other, who are different but not indifferent. This immediate, unmediated repudiation of murder, what could it mean? Think about it. What was there before already for violence to violate? What was there already to be broken? It was not a right that was violated and not a law that was broken. It was a heart. That's all, a person, sacred foundation of the world. And what arises with us and between us, another world already here. Because if difference is the condition for hatred, it is also the condition for love. We will not restore the peace of innocence of the garden before the disaster. I believe this is so, but also this, that every act of war still bears a trace of that primordial cry, and every movement for peace returns to it. The ways are but two, that's all, but there is always two. Keepsake. I watched you, how you were with each other, how you were with us, how you were when you thought no one was watching. I saw your exhaustion, impatience, recklessness, your discipline, your humor, your intelligence and confidence, your camaraderie. But there was one moment in the house in Parktown North. I was carrying a pile of laundry and glanced into the lounge. I saw the three of you standing around the couch, talking over some papers spread out on the back of it. It was a Saturday, early afternoon. A shaft of high-felt light shone through the crack of the curtains. And I saw you and all your circumstances, the worlds you were born into, the worlds you chose, the twists of fate, black or white or brown, man or woman, from here or there, happenstances, all those what's, quiddities and qualities were not you, only the cards you were dealt, what you brought to the table, what you kept up your sleeves. You were you, right there, present and clear, absorbed in each other and the work, unmistakable, alive in the game with everything at stake. It was only a moment, but I saw you. And in that precarious light of, yes, liberty, equality, and solidarity, I saw a future. It was present and it was true. Vuelin Leila, may we find our way. May the way be open.